Welcome to Tea, Toast, and Theology, All Things Nourishing, a podcast by The Table. Find us on the web at the-table.church.
That first reading from Genesis, years ago, there was a wonderful guy named Gordon Hugenberger, who was a pastor, and he was a Hebrew. He was fluent in Hebrew, and he explained that passage in a way that I found really helpful. So Abram had been called to leave his homeland and to trust him who's going to have all these kids. And so Abram was starting to question that. And so God was reassuring him, hey, I'm your shield, I'm protecting you. And then he says, well, what about all these descendants? Am I supposed to leave everything to Eliezer, this servant of ours? And God's like, no. And then Abram's like, how can I know this? And God does this weird thing. He has them set up all these animals, right? And so it's a strange thing. But apparently in the ancient Near East, if kings were kind of trying to figure out whose land was whose, once they came to an agreement, they would swear on it by going through a ritual like this. So they would say, all right, this is my territory, that's your territory, and they would take an animal, split it, and then they'd walk through it. Be like, okay, so if I don't keep my promise, you can do to me what I did to that animal. So it was a way of making the most serious promise possible. So God, by doing that, when Abram's asleep and becoming that, in that theophany, like when God represents himself in an image, he comes in, so God's representing himself in that torch, and when Abram's asleep, but he dreams, he sees God go through those animal pieces. So Abram knows in a language that someone in the ancient Near East would have known that God meant that promise as seriously as anyone could have. So he was reassuring Abram and just giving him that, hey, you can trust me with this. And I just, that sermon made me want to learn the Old Testament many years ago. So I thank Gordon Hugenberger for that, and I hope you find that interesting too.
So the reason why I subcontracted it is I could have said this myself, but you probably saw and heard a passion in her. That was probably the beginning of her taking her faith as seriously as she does, because she heard a really good preacher explain something in such a wonderful way. And in our marriage, there are certain people that I have come to envy, right? Who have made a tremendous impact on the faith journey of Molly. And I want you to hold that thought as we talk about the passages today. But let's look at that map for just a second. I want us to think about this. Just think about this. We read this about the promised land, right? But we never realize that promised land went all the way from the river Nile to all the way to river Euphrates, which is in Iraq. It's not the modern day Israel. It's a huge territory to think about it. That's what God was saying to Abraham at that point. Now, that would also explain the kind of Middle Eastern mindset that goes on, all the fears, all the thought processes that go through, that when you hear the promised land, I just want us to take a look at that and see what it actually looks like. If that was to be true, that is what it would look like, right? So now let me ask you the question that we began today with. What do you think of imitation? Have you ever imitated anyone? And if so, why?
I don't think it's okay. I think I want to follow the footsteps. It's my mom. She was a great example of taking people in when she knew they didn't have a place to stay. It's mostly her sibling. At 18, she became a mom of her three youngest because her mom passed away young. So watching her take care of her sibling, take care of us, her 4 girls and her husband, doing the same thing with my family. Like my family's everything is because of her. Like everyone says, like you're like mama, and that means everything to me. They tell me that I'm like my mom.
Similarly, I'd like to think of my wife Jan. Knowing her history, a few of us, including myself, would want to stay with a parent that was mentally abusive. And her sister and her brother left very early in their lives just to get away from that. And she was left with her. And when her father passed, she stayed with her mother and continued to stay with her until she passed. That perseverance, that determination, to serve God in spite of what that other person was like, really taught me a lesson that I try to imitate when I'm trying to work with people that are difficult. I just remember what she had to do or did do with her mother. And even at the end, Jan had that same perseverance. She could easily have given up during those 9 months of her suffering, but she never did. That's something that I hope I can try to foster in my own life.
I was really impressed with Fred's mom. They lived in an inner city neighborhood, and it was a multicultural thing, and she took everybody in. All the holidays, they had 2 or 3 sittings, everybody was welcome. She put another potato in the pot, and somehow, even though they didn't have enough, there was always enough to feed everybody in the neighborhood, and I was just so impressed with the way she treated everybody. Everybody was important, everybody had a seat at her table who wanted to be there, and she would feed everybody, no matter how little she had. And that really impressed me.
Growing up as the oldest, we were always taught that imitation was the greatest flattery, that our little sisters imitated us because they thought we were cool. They didn't say that to me that much, but my other two. But anyway, I think imitation is always like a direct copy, like you're trying to be like someone. And I think instead, in my life, I've kind of picked and chosen what I think are strong and admirable qualities of people and tried to interweave them in my life and how that we raise our kids. Like I watch my parents when they're being good, for our marriage, how they work through the bad, tough times. The good times are joyful. It's always about family. It's always about what we can do. But then, when it comes to the church, I've had to learn a whole different way to learn about God and imitate in that. And so it's hard to say there's one person I've ever imitated, but rather everybody I encounter plays a part in the development of who I am.
Think about sports, and not necessarily an individual, but particularly today with all the technique that's talked about in any sport, there's imitation involved. Studying film and things like that, where you get a technique, and from Amanda's point, you build upon the good that you see there. So you have a technique that you, a mindset of what you can do, but you expand that based upon what observing others and reading film and whatever you see. And that's certainly in terms of that technique. Obviously, that's more limited, but it still talks about growth through imitation.
Zoe doesn't want to tell you, but she says she imitates Kennedy. And I think to a point, when Kennedy realizes it, the behavior changes to a very conscious of how I'm behaving. She's acting like me, I've got to do the right choices, I've got to do the right things. If she's not watching, okay, whatever, but she's watching. And that's a lot of pressure to know that somebody is looking up to you, trying to emulate who you are.
Yesterday I was sharing with my wife that my siblings were all 4.5, 5 years and above, right? And when we were little, we used to watch these Western movies, right? And they were what were at those times known as the red aliens, that were today. but that's what they would watch. And two of the boys, they wanted to have bow and arrows, so they went and they would cut branches and make bow and arrows, and then they would read about all these stories, and they read that there was this boy and an apple on the head. Exactly, and then
Imitation gone wrong.
then my one of them learned that they could cut a triangle out of a tin, put it in front of the arrow so that the arrow would slice the arrow,
Oh, my gosh.
and then they put the apple on my head. Thankfully for my mother, she saw the incident happening and intervened just before the arrow.
When I was in, I think it was 8th grade, the sister at the grandmother said we have to choose a middle name for confirmation. And I didn't really have a middle name, born. So I kept thinking, who would I want? She said, someone that you look up to, someone that represents for you, some quality that you might want to have. And much like Father Amjad, I was into Westerns at that time, and Disney had a show that often did a biography on it at the time. And I had one biography that I really loved. It happened to be a Mexican lawyer back in the 1800s who was there to help the people. And he stood up to the outlaws and everyone else. And he actually gained fame because in a shootout, he withstood, I don't know, something like 500 or 7,000 bullets in this little adobe house with 20 people shooting at him, and he survived. And so he gained great reputation that way. And his name was Alfego Baca. And that's what I wrote down on that. But it gave me a chance to tell the sister, all about Alfego Baca. So she was quickly to respond, well, choose another name. So I chose my grandfather. He was my second hero, George.
You had your hand up.
You reminded me of a funny story. Speaking of imitation, so when I was growing up, they had these, a special was a special, we interrupt, you're not gonna watch Happy Days tonight because Evil Knievel is gonna jump over 30 buses. And I just lived for that stuff, and my parents wanted to watch something else, I'm like, we would make them put it on, and God bless them, they did, they put it on. And I just remember, same thing, like, my mom's talking to my friend's mom in the driveway, and they're having a good conversation. And all the while they're doing that, I'm stacking tires. And I'm building a ramp. And I have a bicycle that's not meant to be jumped. It's like a we got the 8 hangers and the banana seat on it. And I'm going up the hill and I'm getting ready, and my mom turns around just the right moment and goes, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm jumping. It's like, no, you're not. It's the same thing. Wanted to imitate that courageous man. It's so funny, just the things that we do.
I find that, just thinking about work, I notice sometimes that I think I imitate my godmother, Mary. She was my neighbor when we moved, I was 7, and we moved back to Connecticut after living briefly in Florida. And she was my next door neighbor. She was about 75 years old, and she lived alone. Her husband had passed. And every time she saw myself or my mom or my dad, she'd say, come on up, because you had to walk up a flight of stairs to get into the condo. And so I would go visit her all the time, and I could always just hear, come on up, and I would come on up. And in my office at work, you don't have to come on up, you just have to walk back. But whatever student I have, I changed my office around, so there's a seat. Like if I'm sitting here at my desk, there's a chair facing me right next to my desk. So whenever the student comes in, I say, come on over. And I do, I say, come on over, and I pat the seat and I sit down. And she always used to just sit down and look right at me and want me to tell her whatever I had. What do you have? What's going on? So I do the same thing. What do you have? Tell me about you. What's been going on? So I think I do that because I loved how it made me feel that she would seem so eager and excited to receive whatever it was that I had to share with her. That never felt like it was about her. She would tell me I could tell you stories and stories and stories, but they always came up in a way of response of maybe something I shared or, similar ways she could relate. But I think it's just, I imitate what made me feel loved and cared for.
I think it's safe to say that we imitate because we look up to someone. There is a role model, there's an example to be imitated. As Al said, that courageous man, right? There is some quality in what you are looking at that you want it for yourself. And that's why we imitate, right? And here in this interesting passage, we are being asked to imitate. Paul says, just join in and imitate. And yes, it's so true. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. When I saw all the blessing boxes going up, I was like, that's a sincere form of flattery. When you see free meals, that's a sincere form of flattery.
Yep.
No one will ever accept it, but that's a sincere form of flattery. And that's wonderful, right? That's if we just keep our focus on that, right? And that's what Paul is saying. He joined us in doing that. But he has a reasoning for that. Why should we be doing that? Why should we be imitating Paul and others? Paul had this very interesting idea of not imitating him, because that would be wrong, right? That would lead to that Apple situation, right? That's not very good. Paul's idea is that we are all imitating Christ, right? He had that whole idea of why it's so important to imitate Christ. Because Christ lived a particular life. Because if you think about it, why would God need to come down on earth and do it in a human form? God did it in a human form so that we could have a real life example to imitate. Otherwise, God could have continued doing what God was doing, which is what? Speaking through prophets, telling us all nice things that we should be doing. All those 10 commandments are wonderful, right? As my Old Testament professor used to say, if only people listened to Jeremiah, there was no need for Christ. Right? If only people listened to all these prophets, Christ didn't have to come. But Christ came so that we would have a human form to hold up as our role model, as an example to follow, to imitate. And Christ kept on saying, follow me, follow me. That was something that Christ kept on saying. Follow me. That's the whole idea, that we are following Jesus. And yet, Paul is also very clear about one thing, which is that we are not Jesus. Like Father Dennis said today, we want to, but then we run into that brick wall called being a human being. Right? That's the brokenness that we all have to deal with. And the more sincere we are, the more of that brokenness comes before us. Right? The more cognizant we are of our want and desire and our commitment to follow Christ, the more we begin to see all the forces that don't allow us to imitate Christ. That's where the awareness starts to come in. That's where that whole process of confession becomes so real. All with me on that?
Yeah.
Right, here's where the problem comes in. When we take all these beautiful realizations and processes and turn them into rituals and institutional expectations, then we have broken that link. We are doing it as a formula, thinking that this formula is going to work. There is nothing in Christianity, if we are paying attention to it. I don't know how many of you really focused on today's gospel reading. You know what Jesus is saying? What does Jesus say? What do you think Jesus is saying?
First of all, he called Herod a fox.
Exactly!
Yeah,
Exactly!
So first of all, he's like, hey, you go tell that fox that I'm gonna be right over here for the next 2 days. I'm gonna be curing people, working miracles. I'm right here. Come and find me.
Exactly!
So he challenged him. It was like a duel.
Exactly!
Yeah, right here.
Exactly!
Fox.
Exactly! You think you're really powerful? Right? You think you are conniving? You think you are really smart?
Yeah.
Guess what? I'm here. You want a match? Come on over. I'm like, where is that Christ in the church today? Where is that Christ in the church today? The Christ that we just heard about in the gospel. Where is that Christ? We are so fearful of that Christ because the thing that we now wish to imitate is niceness. I can't tell you how many people used to say to me,
You're so nice.
Just be nice.
exactly, exactly, just be nice,
No.
just be nice, just be nice. And I would say, find me that Jesus in the gospel and I'll do it. A nice guy doesn't end up on the cross. That guy did something that PO'd a lot of people. That guy challenged people. He said, look, what you are up to is no good. Do something better. Have a better role model to follow. That's the Jesus we follow, my friends. That's the Jesus we have been called to follow. And not to be this kind of a person who's like, oh, come on over. No, that's not the point. The point is that the good things that Jesus has asked us to do in his invitation are worthy of being done. They are worthy of being done. And we should never shy away from doing them, even if Herod is challenging us. Even if Herod is challenging us, we have to figure out how to say, I'm here doing that. You got a problem? Come on over. Right? But not to pick a fight. Not to pick a fight. But to not let that good work to stop. Because Paul has this beautiful line that the good work that God has started in you, God will complete it. Right? Have you noticed this one thing? It's beautiful today. He talks about this citizenship, right? But our citizenship is in heaven. And it is from there that we are expecting a Savior. Wait a minute. I thought we already had a Savior. It's from there that we are expecting a Savior. Just as one form or one expression of church gets stuck in the rut of formulas, there is another expression of the church which begins to feel and think that I took the name of Jesus, I am saved, and that's it. Work done. I was saved on such and such day. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and that is wonderful, my friend. But I want to say to you, that is where your journey began. That was the first day. That was not the last day.
That was like the ritual.
That
That
was
was just like the pomp and circumstance and the fanfare.
that is kind of like, and I took a lot of heat over this, right? When we were in that other system, when we had this thing called confirmation. And I wanted, first of all, I never believed in having confirmation at the age of 30. The poor kid doesn't even know what they're talking about. I mean, they're still kind of figuring it out, right? Confirmation is the idea that promise of commitment to Jesus Christ that was made on your behalf when you were an infant, you are actually now wanting to own it. And you are confirming it. You, in your own words, are now saying that yes, that I believe. Now it may happen, but you see the problem with the formula, every 13-year-old has to be confirmed? What if that poor 13-year-old hasn't even given that a thought? Right? That's not fair to the 13-year-old.
Well, then it's just,
Right?
it's like a ritual. Why are you doing it?
Exactly.
Do they even know why they're doing it?
What if the kid is ready at 10 years of age? What if the kid is ready at 20 years of age? Age should not be the determining factor. And in some cases, what I had to confront was not even age. It was all her friends are getting confirmed, therefore, she is going to be confirmed. That's no reason to say, let's get a confirmation in. Because just like baptism, confirmation is not magic. I often say to people, baptism is not magic. For us to think that every person who has been baptized is somehow a follower of Christ, think again. Think again, right? Neither baptism nor the ritual of confirmation, but confirmation is beautiful and so is baptism when it is truly lived into for the intentionality that is in it. An 8-year-old can be confirmed. A 58-year-old may still need some time. Right? So confirmation is to be able to come out and say, yeah. Why am I sharing that with you? Because Lent is a time when we prepare people. And Easter is the time when we love to bring people into the new life that is the risen life of Jesus Christ. And that is a beautiful time symbolically for a new believer to say, I wish to be confirmed, or I wish to be baptized, or like we always do, renew our baptism, renew our baptism, renew our commitment to imitate Christ, to hold Christ, the person, as a role model in our lives. So, I get a little concerned when we start thinking that baptism, or whether it is done as an adult or as a child, confirmation, people do it backwards. Oftentimes when we were preparing people for baptism, I would say, you do understand there is only one baptism, doesn't matter which denomination you're in, right? Because people want you to be confirmed or baptized into a particular denomination. And I would be like, that's not even what the denomination, if you really talk to them, understand it to be. There is only one baptism. Everyone says that. Our Baptist friends, now they don't baptize the child, but they dedicate the child. Semantics. Right? Semantics. Why? Because then the child grows up and receives the baptism, which is the confirmation. Right? And I would say, we want to play with semantics, we can play with semantics. But the real thing is that these are not magical moments. There is no such thing as done. We are all on a journey. And on that journey, there are certain assurances that we have received. And that one assurance is that our citizenship is not of here. Now, last night I talked about citizenship, and I shared with people, you all, thankfully, many of you were actually physically there at the time that I received my citizenship this year. Now, some of you are hearing a lot about this whole process, right? That you can be on a green card for a while, but the fact is that after 5 years, the way I think the current laws stand, after 5 years, you can actually apply to be a citizen. Now, I have been on the green card for a very long time, very, very long time. I never applied for citizenship because, as I shared last night, I believe in one thing. That citizenship is about belonging. Citizenship is about belonging. If I have the citizenship of the heaven, do I belong to the heaven? Citizenship is about belonging. And it is as much something that I desire as it is of the group that is going to accept me. If the group doesn't want me, why do I wish to be a part of it? And I wanted to hear and see and get a taste of the fact that the group that I will be a part of will actually wants me. And that is why I thank all of you. And that is why the judge who administered the oath, he was like so, wow, you brought your whole church. I said, no, that's not the whole church, but yes. Right? Because it is extremely important for people to know that you actually belong. That the community that is accepting you is actually accepting you. You're not just forcing yourself into that community. Now, when I think about it, there were plenty of examples in my life at that, right before that, where I could have said, no. I should probably move somewhere else. But then, God has given us the sense of looking at the good. And the good outnumbered by far any reasons for not doing so. And I shared last night that when you apply for this process, it's a long process. There's all kinds of background checks on you and so on and so forth, which is the right. Because when you're going to welcome somebody, you want to make sure that that person wants to be for the best interest of the group, right? So one of the things that was there, which I had a hard time, I really sat in front of my computer for 2 or 3 days, and I thought about it. Which was, and so you may not know this, but I am a very strong pacifist. I do not believe that war is an answer to anything. Nothing should ever lead to a war. Because at the end of the day, after you have gotten all your people killed, and usually the people who get killed are the disadvantaged people in your society. They are not the rich people. Right? When you have gotten all of them killed, guess what happens? You have to sit at the table and negotiate the terms of peace. So why don't you just do it before? Why don't you try to work out your conflict around the table? Why do you need casualties? Right? So I don't believe in war, right? But there was a question there. That if there is ever a need, would you be willing to take up arms to defend the United States from them? And I had to think long and hard about it. And the thing is, and this is where I concluded, that if I say that I really love this thing, that I want to become a part of it, then yes, I should be willing to defend it with the last drop of my blood. I should. And that, my friends, is also true for the citizenship of heaven. And that is where our life as Christians is not an idle life. Our life as Christians is not about just going to the church. Our life is about imitating, because citizenship is not a right. Citizenship is a privilege that comes with some very, very heavy responsibilities. And the citizenship of heaven comes with the responsibility to do what you wrote in your profile. To do what? To bring that piece of heaven on earth. To make it heavenly for someone. And last night I can tell you, as Sanma mentioned, it was beautiful. And you know, as we were driving back, my wife said to me, music and prayers upstairs or not, God was present. There is no formula that brings God. Right? Yesterday, we were sitting there, Scott led the prayers so beautifully, and you could feel the presence of God there. You know how I knew that God was at work? 2 people said last night, 2 people, I have never really been in this thing about God and religion. And one person talked about her grandchild and about prayer. She prefaced it by saying that I actually don't know about this God thing and all this, but boy did I pray and thank God for saving my grandson's life. Right? Because she saw in that camera footage how close he came to getting really badly hit by a car. Right? And the second person said, I don't know about God and everything, but then when he started talking about what he was praying, I was like, I wish most Christians could pray like that. Right? And, right? When he talked about the hope he gets, in prayer, I was like, that's the testimony of the citizenship of heaven. That's the testimony of the citizenship of heaven. And on my drive back home, Molly said to me, there are people who are getting ready to receive. Right? We need to start thinking about it. How are we preparing them to receive? And make a bold statement out loud. And it was beautiful. Whenever something happened, someone came to me and said, let's talk about this Seder. What in the world is Seder? They've never heard about it. Right? All these things came together, and I had deep gratitude for this community. For we are breaking away from that institutionalized, ritualized thing that serves our own interests, and breaking away to take care of the interests of the other. I hope you had a wonderful lunch that day. Right?
No, I feel a little thinner though.
That's good.
But you see, God is amazing because God uses, to use another expression from your profile, God uses you as an instrument of your grace, of God's grace. You become that instrument of God's grace. My friends, I close this with a deep sense of gratitude for what this community is doing, both on Sunday and on Saturday, and in all the ways where you are present, because that's extremely important. Because Saturday and Sunday is our gathering together, right, where the believers come together. But what happens on the rest of the time when you are there with people is absolutely important. And I thank you for doing that. And I close it with a prayer that let's never forget why we are here as a table. We are here as a table, not to create a wonderful community for ourselves, but to live into the privilege of being the citizen of heaven. And that privilege comes with huge responsibility to do the kinds of things that we are doing, and to do them in a manner that never places any kind of hurdles for anyone. In fact, breaks all those hurdles and creates that environment where people can boldly say, I don't know about this yet, but I really believe something happened there. I receive joy. I receive hope. I may not have completely read the Bible. I may not have gone through a class to receive baptism or confirmation or whatever, but I feel the Lord Jesus Christ working in my heart. I don't have the vocabulary yet. And so let's stop using the churchy jargons. And let's work with people to bring them into the warm embrace of that beautiful citizenship of heaven by imitating Christ.
Thank you for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe.